Hi everybody, it's Carol Clark, your bariatric business coach, and this is another episode of Q&A with Carol. And sometimes I'll get staff related questions and something like, I have a couple of team members that just are like oil and water. They don't get along and it creates this terrible negative pull on our entire team. What do I do about that? And in instances like that, I typically will approach it in this way. The first thing is we are not managing adolescents, at least we shouldn't be. And it can also be a huge time suck for you because you spend so much time trying to put out all these fires and keep everybody happy that it really pulls you away from the work that you are supposed to be doing. Some of that bigger picture work or, scheduling surgeries or whatever it is that your role is in the practice overseeing these team members. And it ends up having you putting out a bunch of fires that you don't need to be putting out and that just drain you. So in those instances, what typically happens is one person will come to you about the other person, and that one will come, and I always ask, have the two of you sat down and talked about this together? And they usually say, no. And I tell both of them that they need to sit down and have a conversation about this, see if they can work through it themselves and figure this out. If they find that they can't, then they can come to me and the three of us will sit down together and we will figure out a plan from there. So on many occasions, they can actually work it out themselves, but there are those times when they just can't. They just continue to escalate in terms of volatility of the relationship. Perhaps it's your check-in and check-out and they're there together all the time, but they just aren't meshing. And so they're becoming very negative towards each other and just really, like I say, pulling the team down. In those instances, I pull them together with me and we have to set some ground rules for them. It's one of those things where you don't permit, depending on their personalities, you don't permit any name calling, you don't permit any, just silent treatment. It's a time where we are mature adults who are gonna have a conversation about what it is that's frustrating each person, and then how can we move forward. So I have them share what their frustrations are. And it's important that you wanna validate it with them, make sure that you're hearing what they're saying, and then you also hear the other person out and listen to both of them, and then ask them if they have suggestions on how they can solve this problem. And I also, during my ground rule phase, talk about how when there's conflict, how it affects the overall team and the overall functioning of the office, and how we really can't tolerate that. So we've got to figure out a way to work through this. And then they share their frustrations, and then we talk about a way to work through that. It's helpful before you go into that meeting if you have a little bit of an idea about what motivates each one of them. For example, if one of them is motivated by praise, that's something good to know. If the other one is motivated just by additional responsibility, knowing what motivates them will help you guide what the process is in terms of solving that problem. You also need to be clear about what it is that you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate. So after they share their frustrations, then you want to sit down and say, how are we going to solve this together? This is not a time for you to dictate the solution because it will be much more effective if they come up with it together. So you listen to them, and then we talk through how to solve that issue. And then you give it you set some expectations for after you solve that together, and you set some expectations in terms of what's going to be happening, and then you set a time when you're going to get back together for an evaluation. And you just, like I say, address that in a mature fashion. Sometimes after you've had that meeting, you can come away and it kind of gives you a different perspective. Maybe you as a leader, you want to change some of the roles around, or maybe it's somebody that this is a recurring issue with them, and you found that they really are having a hard time with anybody that's in the other position, and it might be a time to take a look at your team and evaluate, are they the right person to be on your team? So obviously if there's any sort of disciplinary action or termination or anything like that involved, you want to make sure that you follow the proper process that's set in your personnel handbook, and making sure that you follow those rules. But you sometimes, unfortunately, the best answer ends up over time after you give them some expectations, if they're not followed, to go through that disciplinary process and in the end modify the people on your team. So hopefully it won't get to that. Hopefully they can work through it, and those are just my tips for how best to work through that with them. having them know that you have identified the problem and that you see it and that you share how it's affecting everything else in the practice, and the fact that that can't be tolerated will oftentimes help them put their behavior in check and or be a little bit more willing to figure out how to work through that together. So I hope you find that helpful. That's my Q&A with Karol for today. And if you have questions, reach out to me, Karol, Karol, at weightlosspracticebuilder.com. And until next time, have a good day. Take care.